Welcome to the Grow Your Business podcast. Listen in as we discuss all things business, growth, and marketing with business owners, thought leaders, and entrepreneurs. And now, here's your host, founder of Roundhouse, the creative agency, Saul Edmonds.
Oh, hi, everyone, and welcome to the Grow Your Business podcast. Today, I'm speaking with Paul Fairweather around the topic, exploring the creative process. Paul, how you going?
Oh, very well, thanks, Saul, and great to be here.
Yeah, likewise. It's great to talk to you. I've for everybody listening, I don't actually know Paul, but I do. I was just saying to Paul just a second ago that I feel like I know Paul because I'm on his email newsletter. He shares really great content, and but I guess like the creative process. This is our general topic, but I'm not sure which way we'll end up going with this, but we'll see, I guess. But for everyone else, Paul, who may not know you, well, actually me included, can you please let everyone know just a bit of a general overview of who you are, where you've come from, where you're going to, anything else you'd like to add?
Okay. Well, if I knew where I was going, I'd be busy doing that, I think. But look, where I come from, I'm by profession, I'm an architect, and I've been an architect for most of my career. I suppose once an architect, always an architect. Although I have had a couple of attempts to leave the profession, I've been unsuccessful. So it's in my DNA. Along the way, I've also been an artist. I started painting about 30 years ago, and that's been fairly consistent. Although I must say, in the last 10 years, I haven't done a lot since we had kids. So I'm a father of two kids, 11 and 14. I'm also I'm a writer. Writing is something that's only come to me fairly recently. I failed English at school, and so I always believed I wasn't a writer. Although my paintings have always been about the words, so there's like one word sentences or one word stories with 1,000-word picture. But now in my content, I marry those two things together much more clearly. I've also been I've developed a series of products, design things, the lighthouse and things. But I've also had a foot in the business camp. So when in my architectural company, I was the main driver in the commercial sense. When I sold the practice, I became a thing called a tech chair, which is executive connection. So I chaired a group of businesses, non-design related businesses, in a monthly meeting. And I've been a coach and I've been a facilitator. I was the licensee of TEDx Brisbane for about 6 years. I had the great honour of doing a 3-minute TED talk on the main stage in California. So now I'm sometimes architect. I'm a much more focused artist. I'm a writer. I'm a speaker, and I run masterclasses around creativity and creative leadership, storytelling, and presentation. And for me, it's an aggregation of all those things in terms of the art, the writing, and the teaching that makes me who I am.
Yeah. I think I just had a bit of a realization there about why I feel that I know you. It's because you'd been sending out these newsletters, of which really, to be honest, I'm not sure exactly how I got on that newsletter list, but I'm kind of glad. Like it's actually one of the few newsletters. You know how you get newsletters, and many of them you just go no, glimpse or scan or delete. And with yours, interestingly enough, I think this is my theory as to why I feel that I know you, because I feel that there's I guess in terms of being a creative person, like from my point of view, when I'm thinking about whatever that might be, whether it's being a designer, doing websites, creating artwork, being an illustrator, and the various things that I do, I always sort of come back to the point of view that that it's like, for me, it's always been very much about exploring the process of it, whatever it is, which is, I guess, part of the reason why I suggested the topic too, because it's an interesting, for me, the process of creating something, whatever that might be, is kind of maybe the most enjoyable part for me. And when I was looking, in my tiny little window into what I saw you doing, I thought, that's interesting. This guy who's sharing these nice watercolor sort of illustrations and drawings in a newsletter in a way, one that you don't normally see. And for some reason that sort of captured my attention. It felt, I guess, familiar about, I'm not sure why, but it's maybe that's why I feel that I know you. I don't know.
Well, look, it's certainly interesting. And for me, when I first started my architectural practice back in 1991, I'd only started painting a couple of years before, and I was sharing an office with a couple of guys in the city. It was the recession that we had to have. I didn't have any work. I sat there for 6 months looking at the drawing board. And in this building, I managed to rent a whole top floor of this old building down in Edwards Street as my artist studio. And it was quite amazing. It was a huge building. And it was pre-mobile phones. And I had a extension cord, and I ran my phone line up this light cord in the middle of this building up to my studio. But I really felt guilty being up in the studio painting when I should have been downstairs working, although I had no work to do, because I wanted people, to think of me as an architect, not as this arty artist. And it took me a long time to marry the two together. And later, when my practice grew and it became successful, and I became much more prolific in my painting and started showing commercially, the one begot the other. In terms of the architectural practice, it raised my profile as a designer, possibly above, where it should have been, but because people saw me as an artist. But as an architect, it gave me more leeway because they expected me to be more creative. But I also sold a lot more paintings, so I knew a lot of people through architecture, and they all want a piece of me. But even now, or recently over the last year, as I'm sort of going through my last sort of, my most recent transition, I've had a thing about this being a speaker and a writer and still being an artist. And the same thing's starting to happen. I do those watercolors, and and then there's nothing about them being sale, but every other week I'll get an email saying, "Oh, can I buy that watercolor?" I say, "Yeah, sure. Buy the watercolor. That'd be great." But I in the back of my mind, for some reason, I have this thing about, will people take me seriously as a speaker if I'm seen as a watercolor and colorist, and vice versa. But so to sort of, I suppose, answer your question, or to build on what you're saying, is for me, that's become the perfect vehicle of the aggregation of that, and to do those illustrated stories, which is also the way that I speak. When I speak, I do have a lot of slides and a lot of imagery, a lot of my own imagery. And whilst, I could be a more powerful speaker standing up in front of the audience without any props, the reality is, that is part of me, and that's part of my story. So I'm probably, doing myself a disfavor in a way and trying to be a really powerful speaker, but, it's really about, that storytelling that I'm trying to dig into. And look, I really do appreciate those comments about the newsletters, because, it's that whole thing about publishing anything. You're always like, a tentative hit the button, what's going to happen. And the one that I did, which I normally post by at least Friday, I only got it out on Sunday. And although it was Sunday evening, I got as many hits as I normally get. And I got 2 really nice emails on Monday morning, one from a business leader that I really admire. And he said really lovely things about it. And I thought, God, I thought that one I'd sort of missed the boat a bit. And it was very short. It was only about 350 words, but obviously it hit the point that I was trying to make.
Yeah, I think the thing too, which is this, it comes back to any sort of content that you put out there, and it resonates with me. Very much like I guess like a lot of creative people, or maybe just people in general. When you you want to put something out and you feel strongly about it, or you enjoy it and you want to share it with other people, and you put it out there, there's always this point of which you're like, well, like you were saying, it's like, I'm this kind of person now. If I do this, will that change, like, people's impression of me, or will it be taken seriously, or will it be, whatever, when you do something for the first time. But I think, like, the thing that I feel like I really know now about, generally, when you're publishing, like, your own content online, whether it's our content, like, we've gone through that too. It's like, well, what will people think? Will they like it? Will it be, and you don't know. There's all those unknowns. But ultimately, if it's from, like, a certain place and you're putting it out there, if it's in a newsletter or you're having a show, or there's a new piece of architecture that you're building, if you're doing it from yourself in a particular way, as much as there's all those cliches around that, people can tell. It's always really, it's just obvious. It's people don't have to be necessarily educated in, or be more exposed to it. They can tell there's a certain flavor that things have. And that's like, when I was looking at those newsletters, that's it. Apart from those things we were just talking about, there's that aspect of it too, which is, well, newsletters are usually used like this. They're usually used in this particular way, which is why everyone gets rid of them, but they, unsubscribe because they're pretty shitty and they're just not very good, and that's just it. Like, they're just not very good, like, a lot of them. And because people are going, I just want to sell stuff and add you to a list. And then you're treating this medium like a piece of art, which I think is really great. It's just going, well, and for whatever reason that you ended up doing that, it's kind of wonderful, because you're putting it, newsletters, for me anyway, are usually, like, best if you're using them for marketing. It's best because you don't usually read them. You don't usually read a lot of the content in them. They're visual, and you go, okay, I'm going to click on something and go to a website or go to a podcast. But then with yours, I think what I found really interesting is you do read them, and most of them you don't. You just go, well, that's pretty boring. I'm not going to, So, I'm not sure what that means. It just essentially means that it's good content.
Yeah. Well, thanks for that. As I said, I struggled as a writer, and now I'm sort of finding a way. It's interesting you say that, because I had I cobbled my I don't know quite how you got on my list, because everyone I put on my list were people that I actually knew.
No, I got on your list.
And so, but maybe there's a few that I didn't know very well, or I thought they might be sympathetic ears. But I put a guy on my list who was an ex-client of mine, and he's pretty well retired now. And he did have, and it's a knife to the heart every time I go to the list and see who unsubscribed. And if I don't know them very well, I think, oh, well, that's okay. But if some people I go, I'm just like, what are you doing? But anyway, this guy had he sent me an email and said, look, I just wanted to let you know that I'm semi-retired now, and I just, I'm not really interested. So I'm just giving you the courtesy that I'm going to unsubscribe. And I said, look, that's fine. Let's get together for coffee sometime. But what I wanted to say to him was, just keep on and look at the pictures. You don't need to read it. Just look at the pictures, like a penthouse. Or not for the articles. Like the reverse of that. But he unsubscribed, so I did lose him. But I think that the way I put them together is partly naivety, because I didn't know how you were supposed to do them, and the only way I could do them is the way that I've been, exploring my own creativity in writing, is to tell stories, and that's
probably exactly the best way to do it.
Yeah, so I try to tell stories, and then use those stories to illustrate a point. I'd like to be more defined that. The weekly podcast is the same as the newsletter, which is the week's theme for the watercolors, and but I try to do that. Sometimes it works, but mostly it doesn't. They tend to be the most recent watercolors, but not always. And I'm in the process of writing a book now, which is really going to be probably an aggregation mostly of those newsletters and other articles I wrote earlier. So the one I did on last week was actually an article I wrote for the Brisbane News about 3 years ago. For the New Farm Village News. And I took the story about my son's first word, which was Erdl.
I saw that one. Yeah.
Yeah. So
yeah, I saw that.
Which was really turtle, because I was trying to do this thing about, communication. It was really about my son going, sure. And so I was having this thing at home. So I keep on asking him the same question until he goes, yes, please, I will have that, rather than just sure. But my wife jumps in and says, he'll have that. I said, no, I'm trying to get him to talk to me, not to stay sure. And I was a bit short of imagery, so I had to do that metaphor of the foreshore of a watercolor of the Noosa foreshore. So just playing some games.
Yeah, isn't it funny, like how things that are either misinterpretations, like there's is that sort of evolution of things that are either unintentionally kind of turned into other things, they end up becoming a thing in themselves. I always remember my wife Jill. She said, it's like an ongoing sort of joke in our family about how when she was maybe like 4 or 5, she thought that when someone would say human beings, it was human beings. And so she, for years as a kid, she would sort of try to find an association between not having anyone sort of explaining to her that we weren't part of the bean family, but that she sort of said to me, she was like when I was a kid, I could sort of, I would sort of struggle to try to find an association somehow that we were like beans. She said, yeah, I could sort of see it, I could sort of see that there was sort of some association between us and like the Bean family, at a stretch.
Is that Mr. Bean?
I just like, just like a baked bean. It was like somehow we were related, and many millions of like eons ago, to the Bean family, and here we are today.
Yeah.
It's an ongoing joke, but it's its own then thing for her. There's this sort of evolution of not being pulled up on, like, nah, we're not part of the Bean family. Like, come on. I just go, no, I can see it. It makes sense.
In that article, I did speak about some of the words. So my son and daughter, they both, one called, we got these big louvers, electric louvers, and the other was the dimmers. And they both called them the gloomers rather than the dimmers. And then they called the end of the bread, of the French bread, the nozzle. And so, which is really sort of, an interesting, thing that we do. But I always love, if you ever read The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy?
Yeah.
So Douglas Adams wrote a couple of books, co-authored with someone else, and he took all these really strange named places, mostly in the UK, and he paired them up with words or things that didn't have words in the English language. And I can never remember the words themselves. But the two that I really love, that's always stuck with me, was the coolness, the cool of the opposite side of the pillow. So when you turn the pillow around, you get the cool on the side of your face. And the other one was the act of cleaning up before the cleaning lady comes, which I think might have been Spotthorpe, some place in the UK.
That's fantastic.
So, yeah, so I think that whole wordplay thing is something that I'm sort of very interested in telling stories.
I like that sort of stuff too. Actually it's kind of a good what you were saying before about how you kind of had been an architect, and then you had this kind of process that you went through, being an artist and a designer and speaker and a writer. I sort of had this, or have had this idea in the past, and just wanted to get your thoughts on this point too. Is like we're talking the general broad topic of the podcast is about the creative process and sort of exploring that idea. But I always feel too, like apart from the process of what you do, sort of how you do it, and how you kind of either improve skills and change and like other things more or what have you. Like, is then the creative process also then, I guess, how we evolve? Like, it's not only the what you do and how you do it, but then it's how we evolve. It's like, I mean, what you were saying before, that point of where you're becoming, well, you're not becoming something else, but in one sense you are. Like, you don't necessarily know what it is or at what point you're going to get there. There's no real plan for it, but that influencing factor about either then having children or wanting to do something, having like some great affirmation from some friends or sort of wherever that is. What do you think about that? Like, that the creative process being our own evolution, I guess, as creatives.
Oh, look, I think it's you're 100% correct, and I suppose it's one of the things that I focus on, partially because of my own journey. I'm in the process of setting up a men's program called Rough Hewn Men, and the working title was Creative, Well-Meaning Men, and it's all about men, past middle age, who to reconnect with their own creativity. Because I think what happens is there's two streams. One is a stream like like yourself, who have taken the creative path, and so you have this evolution of the things that you do and how you think. But there's a lot of other people out there, and a lot of people that I work with, the first thing they say to me is, I don't have a creative bone in their body, but they don't understand creativity. Because then if I ask them, and I do a bit of a mean trick when I do a presentation, I show all my work and my painting and my projects and my architecture, and then I say, who here thinks they're creative? And hardly anyone puts their hand up, because I'm trying to make a point. And then I say, okay, who here likes problem solving or new ideas or connecting people or connecting things? And almost everyone shoots their hand up. I say, well, that's creativity. And I'm very much of the view that to have a creative outlet in an artistic sense or a design sense helps us in the other areas of our life, and that helps us open the creativity. One of the focuses that I have in this men's program is about really, giving them a good shake and getting them to wake up to about what their creative essence is. I think of it more not as a startup, because there's enough 20-year-olds doing that, but this is a finish up. This is where we end up, in the later part of our life, and it's about a reinvention. But over the years, and there was some stuff recently that's been republished, there's been these studies, and the stuff that recently was actually about Nobel Prize winning economists, and they did a study of the ages of the economists that won the prize, and there was two distinct groups. One is in their late 20s, early 30s, and the others in their late 50s and early 60s. And they've discovered it's the two different types of thinking. And so for the people in their 20s, it's conceptual thinking, conceptual creative thinking, where they can seemingly pull new ideas out of thin air, just come up with things, with new concepts, out of a young brain. On the other end, at the finish end, it's experimental creativity, which is really about taking a lifetime of knowledge, experiences, and putting them together in different ways to come up with new ideas or new solutions to old problems. And there's been, over the years, I think it was in the first in the 50s, 60s that this was described, and it was crystalline thinking and fluid thinking. And it's why older people are better teachers. And there's been another study of startups again, and whilst there's many more successful startups from the younger demographic, the actual percentage success per population age groups, people are more likely to be successful in their 50s and 60s doing a startup or finish up than if you're in your 20s, because they have the connections, they often have the money, they have the experience. It's just that there's less of them doing it because they're stuck in jobs or doing other things, or they've made the money and they're just retiring. But so I think it's right, and I know in my own experience it is very much that thing of that evolution. I also think there's a lot to do with fear in here as well. And I just wanted to add that, what I said before about if you experiment in a creative, it's a safe place so you can experiment. You don't have to show anyone, you have to show anything, but it gives you that experience of creating something new, which is, where the fear is linked to, because fear comes from, anything that's new, stepping into a new cave when we were, early man, it's why we're here is because we didn't step in the cave. We were cautious. I know for myself, I'm a relatively okay artist. I have some skills in that area. I still get nervous posting on Instagram. I get nervous, if I'm hanging a show. And I know that same nerves. In the last couple of years, I've been doing stand-up. Now, I'm not, I don't have the same experience and skill set in doing stand.
That's pretty brave, Paul.
Well, but that's it. But it's the same sort of fear and feeling in stepping onto that stage as it is, posting a picture on Instagram. So I understand, and I think that a big part of the creative journey is getting over that fear or under that fear or around that fear, wherever it might be. I'm reminded of that book, We're Going on a Bear Hunt. If you've got kids, you've ever read to it, we can't go over, we can't go under, we've got to go through it. And I think that what locks people up or freezes them is this, this fear around creativity. And whether that's someone that is experienced and for some reason, has a lapse, or they get stuck in like the writer's block, or it's someone that desperately wants to do it but just is so afraid of it. And my message is that the fear is the same. And if you talk to any performer, even the most famous performers in the world, say they feel the same. Every time they get on stage, they feel anxious. It's that whole thing. We can't get away from it. So I think that went on its own little journey there, Saul.
Oh yeah, no, I mean that's right. Though I 100% agree. I mean, I would probably go so far as to say, like, I guess also from personal experience with a range of different things like that, I'm never not. Whilst I might feel confident in things and confident in certain skills, I think there's a part of being nervous about things that is quite healthy, because in my mind it always means that it's important to you. Like it's important. It's if I wasn't nervous or maybe like a little bit sort of trepidatious about something, if I'm going to speak in front of a group of people, or like you were saying, like show something, or then even so far as like in sport, because I've always had this very strong feeling in my mind, even though people are like sport, art, they're two different things. For me, physical movement and sport and things, for me, there's I've always like seen these sort of really similar lines in sort of creativity and how you do things in sport, and also in the creative industries. But like even then in sport, when I'm like a squash player, right? So every time I play squash, without fail, I'm always as confident as I might be. I'm always that little bit anxious, but I kind of like that. I mean, if I was too anxious, probably no good. It's probably like you were saying, like there's an element of freezing people up. So that's probably not great. But always being that a little bit anxious about going on the court, I like. It always makes me, it makes you gets the adrenaline going, and it makes you like sort of excited about things. And I like that.
See, that's interesting. That's an interesting analogy because in the squash court, you're very much thinking inside the box there because of the nature of the
Yeah,
sport.
somebody else said that to me recently too. Yeah, that's quite
I'm
funny.
amazed that I used to play squash, but I don't know where the last squash court I went to is down in New Farm. It's now a yoga studio. It's a great space for
Yeah.
yoga.
Yeah, unfortunately, that is the fate of like many squash courts. I mean, it's still popular, but it's not it's a sport that like I'm pretty passionate about squash and other sort of martial arts related things too. I've always seen this real, there's a lot of things that I look at in movement and even shapes too, because I sort of this is just me. I mean, I look at playing squash. When I play, it's obviously movement, but when I look at it, I see shapes and I see angles. Because it's also, I mean, it's very much a game about angles too, and you're in like a certain. So for me, that's always been something that I really love about it. There's sort of like playing chess, but in a physical form, and you get to have this really dynamic movement. But there's a lot of sort of creativity and flair that you can put into it in your own way. Like there's a very strong, that sort of self-expression. But what you were saying before, I mean, I very much agree with too. Well, I mean, every second person perhaps when you say, "Oh, I'm not very good at drawing," or "I'm not a good artist," or like, "I could never do what you do." And I say, well, same thing. It's like the real creativity is that thinking about it and problem solving. And I mean, I can't think of like a specific person off the top of my head, but the amount of people that I've sort of known and friends and other people who are like really I would consider to be who aren't artists or in the creative industries that I'd consider to be like way more creative people than perhaps other people. But at the same time, I think everyone kind of has it within them. Really, like I actually very much feel that everyone does.
Look, I agree, and it comes back to a little bit what we're talking before about the sort of relatively unique style of my newsletters, which is sort of deliberate but sort of an accident. And it's that whole thing of we all have our own styles. I look at and I sometimes fall in the trap and look at Instagram and look at some of my friends' watercolors, and they're more precise, and I think, oh God, But then they comment to mine. I go, I love your work. So loose, and it's this and it's that, and it's that whole thing about being who you are. And you were just talking before. I was just actually talking with the group before about creative energy and energy. And there's I don't know if you've read any Haruki Murakami, Japanese author, one of my favorite authors. But he's also an ultra marathon runner. And he's probably in his late 60s now. And he has an incredibly strict routine every day. He gets up at 4 o'clock in the morning and he writes for like 4 or 6 hours, and he has some lunch, and but in the afternoon he always goes for a run, a 10K run every afternoon. And in the last year I started running. I was never been a runner, and I did my own half marathon around New Farm Park soccer oval. I ran around the oval 50 times to clock up my 21.1 kilometres. And for me, it's really tapping into this energy. And for me, it's the same thing as this creative energy. And I know that over 10 years when the kids were little, I was doing stuff, but I wasn't immersed in it. And it's sort of like the difference between being a spectator and being on the field. And I find that, now my creative energy, if I let my physical energy go down, then my creative energy goes down as well. You sort of can't have both. And I don't quite know. And I suppose, artists that end up being alcoholics or, drug addicts, say they're fueled by a different sort of energy, which eventually leads to destruction, as opposed to the other way. But I don't know if I can I can certainly feel it, and I'm passionate about it. But it's this thing about this, the essence of my own creativity and also physical movement. And maybe it's because when I used to paint large oils, it used to be a very, very physical process for me. Even to the such was that, I remember once buying a whole lot of brushes, and after a week, they were all down to stubs. And I took them back to the art shop, and they went, "Oh my God, these are definitely faulty. Here, take these ones. These are much better. You won't have that problem." And at the end of the next week, I realized that I was wearing the brushes down because I was so energetically painting, and watercolors is not the same. And that's my sort of current medium because it's so accessible. It's so easy. I can do it, in the desk here in the studio, or I can do it on the kitchen bench, or I can do it in a coffee shop. It's really easy, and oils are messy, and you got to clean up, and everything like that. And but there's I think when I'm listening to you about squash, and I used to play squash, and I used to love it. I can sense that it's just part of our energy spectrum. On one end it's creative, and the other end it's physical, and we put stuff in there, and for the physical end, it's it's food and water and it's vitamins. The other end, it's it's inspiration, it's stimulation. But it's just it's just a band. It's all part of the same continuum in my mind.
Yeah, I think the thing that I've had probably highlighted a bit more recently for myself too, as I've been playing squash again, because I hadn't played for many years, and then I returned about 2 years ago, and it's only then even more recently that I've been really saying to myself, like, I really want to get to, just as a personal goal, like I want to be a certain standard or a certain sort of squash player as just a personal squash sort of goal. But the funny result of me doing more training in squash, where sort of unrelated to work in the business, and things that roadblocks that you have in your creative process, or just like running a business and managing stuff. The funny end result that I've actually found trying harder at squash and having real regularity, because I've been trying to play most days and doing more training. And the result that I've been having of being really focused in squash, and I think reasonably focused in other things, but probably not as much, if I was to be honest, not as much as squash at the moment, as just me. But is that I had this realization the other day about, you always know the importance of regularity, of, say, if you're doing, and then repetition. It's a huge part. Like when we had done martial arts for years, of just doing drills up and down and going up and down, doing like 100 front kicks, doing like 100 punches, and then going back. And initially, some people are incredibly boring. What's the value in that? And then you come to a point after that, like I have them with squash, of then really seeing the benefits. And it's kind of that point at which passion kind of meets just lots of practice, and just doing things lots, just doing things over and over and over again. And you've got an idea in your mind, like I had about in squash, of going, I want to get better and better and better at keeping it really tight to the wall. But ultimately at the start, sort of, average. Then doing it, then one day you go, I actually am getting better. And but then what that did was it sort of opens up this different, or it did for me anyway. It sort of allowed me mentally to kind of be more creative than in squash, because I sort of gotten over that. I was like, okay, well, I'm at a certain skill level now. I don't really have to focus on that in the same way anymore. It's freed me up to be, I guess, more creative. And that realization, when I was analyzing what I'd been doing, has helped in like exactly the same way in thinking about different processes in work within the business, like managing projects and different things. It's given me a different perspective on it.
Mm-hmm. Actually, it's interesting that when you spoke about that repetition in karate, it reminds me of those scenes from Karate Kid, wax on and wax off.
Yeah.
And then also the brush, up and down, and he's always frustrated. You're just using me as slave labor. What's this got to do with karate? And then eventually he hits him, and he's like, and he's got the movements. Look, I find it interesting. I'm an early riser, and I do my best writing first thing in the morning, and my best watercolors. But I also like, we've got a Labrador, which I've got to take for a walk and a run. But I also like running first thing in the morning. And unlike Maruka Hamakumi, I don't seem to be able to run in the afternoons. And it's a competing interest, like it's very difficult for me to do both, to do writing and running. I was actually talking about running writing, which is obviously a different thing than what we're talking about. But, running writing or writing running. But I think that I probably writing in my head if I'm running, early and not writing.
Yeah.
But, it is just energy that we have to direct somewhere. And I think it is about a balance. I talk about, instead of, work-life balance, life-work imbalance, because it's about putting life first. And work is part of life rather than, seeing. And the imbalance is not, 2 words. It's imbalance because there's always a tension there, and that tension's got to exist. And whether that tension is, do I run, do I write, do I paint, do I work, and those things, it's all just part of, the energy quotient that we have that we can give to the world. And running is exhausting. Painting all day is exhausting. Writing all day is exhausting. They're all exhausting. And whilst one might be more, mentally exhausting than physically, it's got the same thing. You're knackered. You've got to lie on the couch and, have a little nana nap or, a combat kip to get going again. So, in my mind, you're talking about the process. It's really about that energy. I'm currently reading Bill Bryson's latest book, The Body, A User's Guide, or something it's called. And if you've ever read any Bill Bryson, he's got such a way with words. But he's been talking about the mitochondria and ATP, which is this chemical, which is where all our energy comes from. And it's partly stimulated by ions outside and inside a cell. And when they one goes inside, it creates a buzz, and it's a tiny little electrical current. But per meter, it's the same as a lightning bolt. And I don't quite know how the maths work on this, but he says that in your body every day, you will generate your whole body worth of chemical of that weight, of this ATP, your whole body weight in one day. But at any one time, you only have 60 grams in it, in your body, because it's constantly being used. And it's basically, it's life's battery. And I think what happens is that, basically when you die, if you stop breathing, then that stops producing and you only have 60 grams of it. And so then your cells immediately start dying as soon as they're not getting oxygen as part of that process. But it's this whole idea of this these little things that are this energy. And it's like the same thing with creativity, and you've got to continue to use it. And it's back onto your point about practice. If you don't use it, you lose it, and whether that's a skill or the mindset. I know you asked me for a quote towards the end, and it just one's come to mind that is really relevant to this.
Yeah.
And it's from Shakespeare, from King Lear, and it's nothing will come of nothing. And what it's about is it's really about, one of his daughters doesn't give him the praise and adoration he expects, so he cuts her out of the will. But it's not about that. I first read it when I read an article about Boyd, a famous Australian artist, and when he was still alive. And he used that as a mantra every day, that when he faced the blank canvas, that nothing will come from nothing. unless he picked up a brush and started work, at the end of the day, there would be no painting. And that for me is a little bit like saying before about, going on the stage or going on a squash court, that little bit of nervousness. That this great artist, Arthur Boyd, that every day he felt that same, fear of starting or something. And he knew that, to get something, he had to start, otherwise if he did nothing, then nothing would come from it. And for me, that's a powerful mantra, because definitely. He used it, and it's such a reminder, and especially the 10 years when I probably wasn't focusing on my real skill set, that nothing was coming from it, and it raises other questions about conscious creativity. What are we producing, and that's one of the things I think I like about the watercolor. It's got a much smaller carbon footprint. A large painting has a lot embedded, and you need a bigger wall. Everything's bigger, but a small watercolor is quite almost transient. And it's got such a small footprint, which is off. But for me, that nothing comes from nothing is the quote I'd offer up today to your
that's a great
listeners.
One. That's I think also maybe the two with watercolors then too, or anything that take less time, is you can see results then more quickly too, can't you?
Yeah,
you can see, and you don't have to go through this long, arduous process of things being changed and it's not working out right. It's done, and you put it out there. And I guess maybe a little bit like the different sense of satisfaction you get from doing things like in real time. It's got a start and end, like say a squash match, like sport. You don't have anything tangible like to hang your hat on, but you've got this process, like it's all the process, and you've obviously end up winning or losing, but like the enjoyment that you get out of it, or whatever you actually get out of it in terms of learning and sort of evolving as a result of that like individual game, is all process. And I don't know about you, but I think for me, like whether it's creating a watercolor or having like a squash match or doing any creative kind of pursuit where you're putting creativity into it, there's a part for me that is always of kind of really needing to embrace, as hard as it is, like as hard as it's hard to sort of embrace the likelihood that you're going to screw up, or that like something's going to just not work out well. Like you kind of just need to do that, and that flows into that quote too, like you need to be doing, even though the likely, like you don't necessarily know the results, like you mitigate the likelihood of having a result that you're not going to like because you're doing it more, so you're probably going to be better at it anyway, just because you've been doing a lot of watercolors. You just naturally, there's no way that doesn't happen. Is the more you do something, you just get better at it.
Yeah, actually it's interesting. I'm basically pretty well self-taught for my painting, but I did take lessons from a guy who's this retired art teacher from BBC in his garage for about a year doing oils, and I wanted him to teach me watercolors, and he refused. And he said, look, you have such a loose style, because I'd done some already. He said, just continue that. And anyway, I wouldn't listen to him, so I got some DVDs, or it might have even been VHS tapes back then, and a couple of books, and had these lessons. And he was dead right. It really stilted me, and it took me a long time to unlearn that. But he said that what they used to do is they used to always do 8 at a time, because watercolor is such a fluid and almost accidental medium, that you had to do 8 just to get at least one really good one. Yes. Which was sort of interesting, and part of my journey recently, and I'm just changing the focus. I've been doing a watercolor a day, and I've been posting every day. I'm not posting every day now because I'm still doing a watercolor every day, but I'm just not posting every day because I want to be a little bit more selective. But years and years ago, I had some sort of success in painting, and it was a very happy, sad moment. I was shortlisted for the Archibald Prize in 2001. And that painting was a tribute to a friend of mine, in fact, my best friend, my best mate, who died the year before. So it was fantastic that I could honour him in this way. And he was high profile in the art world. And that, one of the main reasons it was hung. But as one of the judges and one of the board of trustees who I knew said to me, who also knew my subject, said, look, if you hadn't have done it, it would never been considered. So, you had to be in it, to win it. And I didn't win it, but I was hung. And up until that time, I'd been painting, and I did some landscapes. They're mostly still life. And all of a sudden, I did a painting, which was a double portrait because you can't paint, posthumously. And so it was a reference to my friend that had passed away. And when I did that painting, it had real meaning. I had a painting that had real meaning, had meaning to me and meaning to other people, and meaning to the board of trustees of the New South Wales Art Gallery. And I found it very difficult to come back and paint bowls of chilies and apples and things, because all of a sudden it didn't seem to me to have meaning. So a very good friend of mine, an artist, Yenda Carsons, who worked a lot, and we did some collaborations together. She gave me some fantastic advice, and she said, just go into the studio and play. So I said, okay, I'll do that. And she said, don't think about showing, just do it for yourself. Just go in and play. And it was the best advice I ever had. And I got in the studio and I got into it, and I just played with colour and form, and went back and forth with older subjects and things. But what I did then was, which you didn't actually give me advice on, but I know what advice would have been, is I just showed all that work. I didn't curate it, and that was a mistake, because that really wasn't the work. That was the process. And it's back to your sort of a point. That was a process I needed to go back to get myself back in touch with my art, and it wasn't really the end result. Maybe a couple of them could have been, and it was probably my least successful show on a commercial sense, because it was me trying to find out who I was rather than me being who I was, which is something, again, you mentioned earlier about this thing of self-finding ourselves in our art or our creative pursuits. So I really that sort of resonates with me about this thing of doing the watercolors.
Yeah, it's as important though, too. I think like having that experience though, then too, like is I think equally as important as having then a more successful show, because it makes you it's like if you don't know what something is really unless you know what it's not, too.
Yeah. No, look, it's all part of the journey, and I look back on that, and it's sort of a question you asked earlier, and I've been sort of mulling over it. The 10 years when I didn't do a lot of painting, at times I regret that, but I immediately snap out of it and go, I am, who I am because of where I've come from.
Yeah.
And that's all been part of the journey. The sabbatical has been part of it. One of the things that I teach when I talk about creative leadership, I do a thing which I call the creativity irons, and it's a play on word IONS. So it's inspiration, action, and expression. But they're ions because an ion is a charged particle, a negative or positively charged particle, and that's what salt, is ionic bond between a sodium and chloride, and so the sodium chloride is salt, and that's an ionic bond. And so, and my thing is that it's always the flip side. So with inspiration, there's always distraction, and with action, there's always procrastination, and with expression, there's always trepidation. And those things live together, and they've got to be together. And whilst we try to have an orientation towards the more positive aspect of it, the reality is it can't live without the other side of it. And, we talked before about, action, and we have a bias to action. You got to still procrastinate. At times, you can't work all the time. At times you've got to rest. In expression, you can't express yourself without having some amount of fear. It's got to live there, and it gives you some of that creative tension, gives you that energy to get over it and go forward. And inspiration is also, you seek inspiration, and invariably you'll run down a rabbit hole, and all of a sudden you're distracting, and oh my God, I've spent 5 hours on Instagram looking at funny dog photos,
right.
or whatever it might be. But they all live together, and that's one of the things. And so for me, maybe I procrastinated a little bit too long, but but then the action comes, and at some stage, I will procrastinate because I have to. It might be linked to distraction, it might be linked, to trepidation, and so that's to the core of these things. And whilst I say positive and minus, positive and negative, they're not really positive and negative. They're bound up in the same thing. They're like the negative and positive ions on the outside of this cell that, when they go inside, they create a reaction which creates life. It's the battery of life. And this is the same thing. And unfortunately, especially when you come back to the fear part of it, a lot of artists, over the years have not understood this of themselves, that the process that they're in is one about creating something new, which comes with it by genetic, inheritance and anxiety, because, we don't know where we're going. And one of the first questions you said to me, tell me where you've been, what you're doing, where you're going to. Well, I don't know where I'm going. And that's where, I get anxious. A lot of artists don't understand that. So what they do is they self-medicate. They go, oh my God, I feel anxious, and they go down the myth of the tortured artist, oh my God, I'm sensitive, I better take heroin or drink a bottle of scotch. When really, if they stood back and went, you know what, it's just part of my job. My job comes with anxiety. I've just got to live with that, to move forward and to create my art. And look, and in the masterclasses I run, I unpack it further, to the real negative and positives, and, distraction becomes addiction, and inspiration becomes ideation, and down the bottom end, trepidation becomes isolation, but really that expression becomes satisfaction and eventually gratification. So it's this bias towards the positive, but not leaving them. You can't have one without the other. It's the yin and the yang. I think I've got, it's not there. I've just actually written an article about it. I have a yin and yang goldfish drawing that I did. You can't have one without the other. They live together.
Oh no, very much. I mean, it's all, and all those that, philosophy and that way of thinking is then, once again, just getting back to the core things that I always find flow through most, if not all things, from physical activity, to when you're creating or when you're thinking. There's always two parts to all things, and it is kind of a bit misleading, I think, like you're kind of saying, in a way, that when you're talking about things that are negative, there's an automatic response that, because it's negative and you've got positive, therefore you don't want to go towards the negative because it's probably bad and there's going to be pain and sadness and crying or whatever, sort of like ouchies, like fire, but then at the same time, it is kind of misleading, because like you can't have one without the other, and you can't know, it's like you don't really know what light is, or seeing light, or actually even seeing anything, without knowing that there's dark when there's no light. And, you wouldn't, if we never had darkness, if you never had night, you'd never appreciate or understand light, because there wouldn't be anything to compare it against. It'd always just be light, and it'd just be like, oh, well, there's light, there's no dark. So you wouldn't even understand light, because it wouldn't even be a thing. It'd just be that is that, it's sort of.
Yeah, no, look, exactly. And it's just about, knowing it. It's an awareness to go that, like it's okay to have a rest occasionally, it's okay to put stuff off. Like, one of the things for me, and, I don't know if you experience this, that, I often do my best work when I've had time to think about it, and I'm either painting or writing in my head before pen or brush goes to paper. But often I feel I'm procrastinating, but I'm procrastinating in a good way. It's different to a procrastination when on Saturday afternoon I'm, having my combat kip, and after 20 minutes I wake up and go, oh, I might just have another one. That's procrastination. That's that's a
that's a
different thing.
different sort. Yeah,
that's a different sort of, and the same thing with the fear. We've got to live with the fear, but not let it overtake us. Not let us, freeze us to inaction. And all these things, whilst they're paired, they all relate to each other, and particularly inspiration and trepidation, because I know that as soon as I get an idea, I get that, oh my God, you're stupid. How are you going to do that? That's going to be too hard. Fear starts speaking as soon as you got, so as soon as you got the light, there's the dark there.
Yeah, you got your ego. Yeah. I mean, that was I was always the one thing that I think, not that it's necessarily made me, like I'm some sort of expert at this now, but I know it helped when I first, because my wife and I studied illustration at Queensland College of Art when we first, before we had our, after school and we went to university, we met there. And I remember the first lot of sort of drills, I'll call them drills because that's what they are really, it was sort of exercises, creative exercises that were designed to and did their job in snapping, like most people, out of one kind of habits that they already had to leaving your ego a little bit more at the door about like you coming into an environment going, I'm a good, I'm really good at pen and ink, or I'm really good at this. And you've probably arrived at Queensland College of Art because you're reasonably good at something. So do a whole heap of exercises that, snap you out of that. And they were those things like we do. I think one of them was doing 100 drawings within a very short amount of time. And you have to draw one thing, but you have to do 100 of them. Or the other one, using other materials that you've never used before, like just using paper to create a whisper to a shout. And you've got 5, things, and you can't draw on it. You can only manipulate it, tear it, crunch it, and trying to snapping you into a different way of thinking, which in my mind was always about, once again, getting back once again to similar things in, things like martial arts, where you have certain activities that sort of are designed to help leave your ego at the door a little bit. It kind of helps you along through that sort of process, that you're not as focused on it being, an incredible outcome or anything like that. You're just, being more focused on the process and being in the moment, having a more of a, I suppose if you wanted to use a different word for it, more of a Zen state, that you're focused on the activity itself, which ultimately I find anyway, that kind of leads to good results that you end up being happy with, and good growth if you're in the moment and you're just and it's not always, that's sort of easier said than done, right? It's not that's always an easy thing to do when you're trying to go, I want to do this and I want to be a certain sort of outcome. It's hard to separate yourself from that. But those kind of activities that put you just in a I guess a mental state more than anything about repetition. And that's what it's what I guess, different breathing exercises, if you're talking about yoga and other things like that, are about. They're putting you into a certain mental state to focus just on that thing and nothing else, which then when you get in that sort of state, then it's easy to leave your ego behind, because the ego is not even in the same room. It's hey, what's up? It's dude, hello, and you're and you're just focusing on that thing, which is always generally very relaxing, when you can do that. And you get a good, sort of flow, and energies in sort of the right place. But we've talked about a lot of different things, I guess, in relation to the creative process, Paul. I just as one of our sort of last things as we move to wrapping up, I suppose, I would, because I know you were talking about creative leadership too. If you could just like expand, I guess, as our last point about your thoughts on the importance of, and I guess why you're doing that in terms of creative leadership, and for people listening who might be, I guess, not really familiar with that idea, who is that usually? Is there a specific target audience for that, or is it for people in business or anyone, or creative people?
Yeah. Okay. Well, it's a quick snapshot. Look, it's for anyone, and I run a monthly online class. I think the next one's 16th of September for 4 hours. And some people come there from business, and some people come for a personal leadership. The importance and the overlap with creativity is, I see the three main jobs of a leader is to take a team, or if you're self-leadership yourself, from fear to confidence, from confusion to clarity, and from sort of from a challenge to create a vision for a better future for all. So they're the three main jobs. And the reason the big sort of overlap with creativity is, as we've already spoken about, is that fear, particularly, and also the confusion and the problem solving, is also inherent in the creative process. And for a creative leader to be truly creative, whilst he's got to lead and appear confident to his team, he's also got to stay longer in that level of anxiety and fear and understand it. So I work with teams of executive leaders, so in a business, partly so they've got a language and a dialogue that they can have around that, while still showing up with their teams, with confidence. So that's the sort of the basic of it. And what I do is I using drawing, because drawing, symbols and images, we decode them differently in our brain, our subconscious. So I go through a process using drawings to get people to envisage, where they are to where they want to go, and then to look at that to see what's got to change for them to get from where they are to where they want to be. Or if it's, a much sort of broader thing, is to what's the story that you're telling your team to where you want to go to, so it's the story arc. So that's the thing. The reason that it's so important is that, it's that whole thing, and I can't remember where the quote comes from, but I think it was Einstein. We can't solve the problem using the same tools that got us into the mess in the first place. The world has changed dramatically, and it's no longer business as normal. So it's not just about the old A-type leadership of do as I say, not as I do. Go forth. Leading people in the battle. Now we've got to be much more creative, and we've got to take those skills and understandings that we have of creative process and apply those to our personal lives and to our businesses to get them to change and to be able to have them show up differently in a very different world. So does that answer your question, Saul?
Oh yeah, definitely. No, thanks, Paul. That was great. I was just because I know, I guess from we're more familiar, I guess, with where creativity meets some of these other subjects too. But I'm just aware also that, like, a lot of people still, like we touched on earlier too, like people think of creativity as you're being creative, you're self-expression, painting, art, but it's much more than that. And I mean, I just wanted you to talk about that, because that's I think it's a really important point. It always has been, and like always certainly will be something that is very, very close to my heart that I always find very, very important. And I guess like almost like a level of frustration too when I see people or have people who say that and who go, I'm not creative. I go like, like really, you gotta change that way of thinking, because like everybody is, there's this sort of part of everybody that is very much like that, and it's just manifests itself in different ways with different people. And there's a bit of like amazing creative thinking, problem solving, crazy problem solving skills that are just, you look at people and go, that is just amazing. They're just, or it comes out in sports people. You see this, like, you're an artist, you can see it, like the way that they approach a physical, problem is like nobody else.
Yeah. No, look, I agree. And I think it is important. And I think creators have a lot to offer in the world, and it's needed. It's really needed now for us to reshape. Yeah.
So have you got for us another quote, Paul? Another quote, another quote. Now that you used your quote up, have you got another one?
I've got another one. Look, one that I really love, which it's Sarah Barnard, I think her name is. I get that wrong every time, but my good friend and co-host of TEDx Brisbane, Carl Ingram, used to always have it in the front of his map magazine when he had it. And it's, the world needs dreamers and the world needs doers. What the world really needs is dreamers that do.
That's great. I love that.
Yeah,
that's excellent.
Yeah. And I suppose what I would say is, part of that doing is not just, is also the getting out there and expressing. That's it. So,
yeah, definitely. So I'll just just before we finish up, could you just let everyone know once again, or just let people know like how best to get in contact with you, where you are online, and any other details you'd like to share.
Yeah, sure. Listen, the best place to find me is at my website, which is www.paulfairweather, one word. That's FAIRWEATHER, as in the beautiful day it is today, .com. So paulfairweather.com. And that has links to most of my things. That has a link also to my creative portfolio and my architecture website. I'm on Instagram as Everythink, THINK, which came about because it's the way I say everything, and people used to give me a hard time about it. So I thought, I'll just make it my thing. So it's Everythink, which is mostly my daily watercolors. But if you go onto my website, there's a link there if you're interested in receiving my newsletter. You can subscribe up there, or you can just drop me an email. Is it paul@paulfairweather.com, and I'll whack you on the list.
Yeah, or you might just appear on it like me.
Yeah, or you might just turn up. You might be lucky enough to turn up already.
and I'm glad, I'm glad that happened so mysteriously. So once again, like, thanks, so much, Paul. It's been really great to have you on the podcast. Appreciate it.
Yeah, well, thanks, Saul. I've really enjoyed it, and it's been great to finally virtually meet you.
Yeah. So with that in mind, that's actually it for today, guys. Right. Thanks so much for listening into our podcast. Before we go, please leave your feedback as well as any suggestions for topics you would like us to discuss in any future episodes. Thanks again for listening to the Grey Business Podcast, and we'll see you again soon. Bye, guys.
Thanks for tuning in to today's episode